Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the weekly rebalance. Today we're going to be talking about SpaceX and just IPOs in general, just a little bit of conversation on that. But should be an exciting episode, very topical with everything going on in SpaceX over the past week. Uh, Ethan, how are things going?
It's going pretty well over here, Nick. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to hear from you. I'm excited to dive into this episode. We get a lot of questions about SpaceX. It hasn't stopped since the IPO. We've been getting a lot of requests about it. We've been getting a lot of questions about it. Everybody seems to be interested, and I think everybody has an opinion as well. So, uh, should be an interesting one to dive into.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to talk about SpaceX. It was a fun one to dive into a little bit more deeply, which we'll talk about all here in a minute. But there were some things I didn't realize about SpaceX until I started really digging deeply. I think I knew about them, but didn't know just how impactful some of these items were. So excited. They are an exciting company. So they're expensive too. They're an expensive company, but they're an exciting company, which is why they're so expensive, I guess. So
Yeah, I
excited
mean,
to, yeah, we'll have to unpack that.
there's a lot to balance here. Like you said, that they have so many really unique products, and so many unique innovations that they have going for them, but they really are expensive, and that's where the debate comes up. But
Yes, exactly. Well, let's get into, let's not waste any time because I want to get through the market update and get into SpaceX.
yeah, let's do
So,
it.
and markets have been, generally somewhat, positive but stable. For the year, we're in a position now. The S&P's up 12.84%.
Yep.
The Nasdaq's up 13, almost 14. The Dow's up 11, almost 12. So, I mean, there's not much to complain about as an investor there. And looking abroad, things look great too. I mean, there's a lot of green on the screen when you look at the world equity indices in Bloomberg, and not a lot to really complain about. Investors should not be unhappy, even if they've missed parts of the rally, by being invested in different sectors or different styles. At the end of the day, like everyone should be largely pretty happy because markets are positive across the board.
Yeah. I mean, we're coming off all-time highs on the S&P 500, I think Friday, right? We hit all-time highs there.
Yeah.
The Nasdaq rebounding nicely from the bottom that we hit not too long ago. We had a pretty
Mhm.
steep pullback in the Nasdaq and recovered very quickly there as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. And we've had a great earnings season as well. I mean, there's been I don't remember the exact percentage. The last I heard was something like 90% of earnings that were reported thus far from the S&P had beat. I think it's slightly lower than that now, but at the end of the day, really strong earnings season. And what is there to complain about? You got earnings up,
Yeah.
beating estimates. You got stock market returns positive. And I guess there's always the pessimist that could look at that and say, well, you've got impending doom around the corner, which is obviously possible when you get as expensive as things have gotten. And SpaceX is going to be a fun caveat to talk about some of the expensiveness of these AI stocks, and a lot of the top of the market cap. It's a good proxy to talk about some of the risk there. But at the end of the day, when you keep beating earnings, makes sense. Stocks keep hitting
Yeah.
record highs.
Yeah. I suppose really the only part of the market where people might have a little bit of a complaint is fixed income. And we covered that pretty at length last week with the discussion about the Fed and how that ties in. We did get that jobs report last week, which largely came in much worse than expected. So, um, decreasing the probability of a hike at our next meeting, further reducing the market's expectation for a hike at the next meeting. And I know we've got CPI coming up here pretty soon, but um, as it sits right now, we've been reducing probabilities in
Yeah,
terms of a hike.
exactly. I think, it's going to be interesting. The data that comes out that is reviewed by the Fed, and they've kind of alluded to this, that they're having to revisit how they're especially looking at labor data. Labor
Yep.
data is very challenging nowadays, and I've seen some stats. I need to dig into this in a little bit more detail. but a colleague of ours at a firm, a client of ours, uh, pointed me in the direction of a couple different alternative data sources here. But I mean, how AI is impacting the labor market is going to be interesting, and it's not impacting, it may not be impacting it the way that we think. And I think the Fed is sitting in a position where they're using these very traditional measures, but are they properly capturing what's happening?
Yeah.
I have some questions about that. I, the conversation I had earlier today, which, again, need to dive into more. Maybe we can dive into this next week, even after getting a chance to do some more research on it, but was basically suggesting that hiring in more senior roles at white collar jobs is, or I guess any job, but any more senior role, that hiring is picking up very quickly. And the hiring pace for more junior roles is dropping drastically because there's just AI can do so much of their work now.
Yeah.
But you can hire a senior person and train, if they're using AI properly and to its fullest capacity, that senior person can just use the AI tools to get a lot of the junior work done alongside their regular work. And they're just extremely productive compared to what they were before. So
Yeah.
um, and we've seen that even in our own business. In my opinion, we have all these interns that want positions with us throughout the year. We have an interesting internship program here at Revisor where we do basically a class, and then unpaid, we just teach them about our company, teach them about the industry, and they do a project, right? And then they come back and we offer the best ones internships. We're running out of work to give them.
Yeah.
uh, there's just, I mean, some of the work that used to take us hours and hours and hours to update our fact sheets and update our returns and stuff like that, just done in, less than an hour now, mostly
Yep.
because of the efficiencies coming from AI. And we're kind of looking for work for them now. There's
Yeah.
just not as much of it exists.
Well, and that's a funny thing to bring up. Not that we need to get into our fact sheet structure too much, but I just feel like it's an interesting insight to provide. But I mean, when I started running proposals and doing fact sheets was, maybe a fifth to a quarter of a full-time position for a junior person. And now it might be, I don't know, like an hour a month.
Yeah, it's just so easy. I mean, we did
Yeah.
a detailed proposal earlier today on an options presentation we have to give tomorrow, which is more in depth than most of our proposals that we would normally do. I mean, we did it while training another employee that's getting into this world in less than an hour. I mean, if we would have been doing it without training, I mean, you're talking this is ready in 10 minutes.
Yep. Yeah.
10 minutes for like a very detailed proposal analysis of a position and a presentation on an option strategy for a client. I mean,
Yeah.
crazy.
Pretty crazy. Well, and all of this ties nicely into SpaceX because, they're pushing hard into that world. I know one of the big things that Elon Musk has talked about, which I wish, this just popped into my head now. I wish I would have done more research on this before we hopped on, but having data centers up in space. Um, I know that there's been a lot of criticism or a lot of, I don't know, um, public criticism of that plan, basically saying that they don't think that it would work for a number of reasons, like cooling and a few other issues that certain experts bring up with that plan. But to me, it seems like a great win-win. You don't have all of that noise pollution and everything like that, and space is pretty cold, so it seems to be a
Yeah.
win-win. But I'm not an engineer, so I would have no idea. But that's one thing I thought of here recently because that is one of the drawbacks with AI.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, let's get into and talk about our research of the week with SpaceX.
Yeah,
'Cause, let's just get right into it. And I think one thing to cover before we get into it is what does SpaceX actually do? Because
yeah,
I think it's some of what they're actually doing is lost on people. Some of it's obvious and some of it is not. But they really have three major business segments.
mhm,
You've got their their actual, let's just call it space travel, um, launching of satellites into space, the expansion of the human race into space. And that's the one that's very obvious. It comes in their name, right?
Yep.
So you've got that. You've got um, AI, generally speaking, which I want to come back to in a second, because that's more nuanced than it maybe seems on the surface. A lot of people are using maybe Grok or something like that. That's a competitor of Claude or a competitor of ChatGPT or whatever. And then you've got um, so you've got that direct as well, and then you've got Starlink,
Yep.
which is connected to, travel into space, but in reality, in my opinion, it's a very different business. It's delivery of broadband to the world,
Yeah, and it's the only
back to
profitable
Earth.
one right now. Only
Only
profitable
profit,
segment. Yeah.
very profitable as
Yeah.
well. Not
Yeah.
very large profit margins there. But the one I wanted to come back to, which I think is very important to dive into, is AI. It's not, I think everyone thinks, well, that's Grok, right? That's a competitive large language model, which it is. It competes with Claude and Gemini and all the other ChatGPT. But one place that um, SpaceX is heavily invested is the AI infrastructure.
Mhm.
They have massive contracts supporting things like companies like Anthropic, who are their competitors on one side, but Anthropic is a perfect example. They have massive contracts to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on data centers that are built out by SpaceX, and that is a massive part of their projected future revenue that is really very different than what maybe you would think of comparing SpaceX to Anthropic or OpenAI or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting to think about, you've got Grok and then you've got Claude and, Anthropic, um, the owners of Claude buying compute power from SpaceX. Not really something you would automatically think of.
Right. And I think that that was a little bit lost in there. And it's, we've talked a lot on this podcast about AI infrastructure build out. Well, and I think it's easy to lump SpaceX, especially because they trade at such a premium, which they do. They trade at a massive premium, but I mean, they're not. They shouldn't be lumped in with just all the other hyperscalers, the Anthropics when they go public, the OpenAIs when they go public, because they are part of the actual infrastructure build out. And Elon and his infrastructure build out for Tesla does, in my opinion, have a little bit of a leg up on a lot of the market there in terms of he knows how to build a factory, he knows how to build a data center, he knows how to build out what's needed there from an infrastructure standpoint, which is a different skill set that the other parts of the market that we're talking about might not have in the same way.
Well, it certainly is, and I think that's a great tie-in to the recent earnings call, or the recent earnings that we got, because coming out of the earnings report, largely, most of it was a lot better than expected. The biggest thing that weighed down on their performance the following day was the amount of CapEx they were spending on AI infrastructure build out, just coming in much heavier than a lot of analysts were expecting. Um, all of that kind of lines up with the story that we're telling here, where Elon, SpaceX, they want to be, running the back end of Claude, all of these other systems as a major part of their business, which is definitely going to require a lot of CapEx up front. I think the issue that we're running into now is the same issue that we're running into with all of these other companies, which is how much CapEx is too much, and at what point are we going to start to see returns on these dollars, which is, a forward-looking thing that's hard to answer right now. But it seems like a lot of these major players in the space are very willing to outlay this capital right now, in hopes that it really pays off in the future.
Yes, exactly. Well, it's a similar case for Oracle. Oracle's another one that's has massive amounts of CapEx, but the compare, they've been downgraded by the rating agencies, companies on their bonds. Their investment risk is much higher than it once was. they've spent so much money on building out their AI infrastructure, but in reality, there's this mismatch because they're financing a lot of this debt. Like, I mean, SpaceX, Oracle, either one, like they're having to find it, they're having to raise capital from somewhere, right?
Mhm.
So, for example, SpaceX 2026 CapEx expected at $50 billion. Well, their revenue is expected at $21 billion. So they got to come up with they're burning $25 billion um, in 2026. That structurally is unsustainable, basically,
Yeah.
without continuous capital raises. Oracle's an interesting example, right? They sold some bonds. There's a bunch of bonds showing up at, I don't know if you've probably seen this, but there's a bunch of corporate bonds showing up from Oracle. They're raising all this capital. And they downgraded, the rating agencies downgraded them because if you think about it, these are long-term debts that they're and the infrastructure they're building is long-term investments, but the contracts are short-term. The revenue that supports that is not as stable as you would think. So you have this short-term, it's hopefully it's going to continue, and there's huge potential there, but you've got the computing contracts are short term, but the build out, that risk is long term.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to a classic portfolio management concept that you cover, especially with insurance companies, but liability and asset mismatch.
Mhm.
And that duration mismatch can really be painful when it unwinds in the wrong direction. So um, certainly something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on. Which puts into perspective, that's I don't know, with great risk comes great reward, right?
Yeah.
Because there is definitely like the potential. I mean, your SpaceX is expensive, like we talked about. I'm just gonna pull up their numbers really quick. But and you obviously can't even look at it from a price to earnings ratio perspective. But the let's see, do they even have a
I think
price
I
to
was seeing
sale?
price to sales of 80.
Yeah,
That's
80
what I was.
times sales.
Yep.
Not
It's
cheap.
pricey. It's pricey.
It's pricey. Yeah, I see an EV, enterprise value to EBITDA of says currently at 40.
Yeah. It's pretty pricey.
Yeah, not not cheap. But where can you get the potential growth rate? So that's the caveat here, and the risk you're taking is, well, what is the growth rate? What is the potential here of AI? And I think, like we've talked about on the podcast a couple times, this is what's different about the AI build out versus the dot-com era, is there is genuine spending that's trickling into SpaceX or these other companies from the build out of the AI infrastructure.
Yeah.
Um, Not just a dot-com website with no other meaning behind it. Um, but very, very different. The growth rates are, they have to be, you know, they have to be high to support the valuation.
Yeah, they certainly do. I mean, all of this, it all connects to NVIDIA raising the $500 billion today for third-party companies to purchase more compute power. And, a huge piece around this news is Jensen Huang being like, hey, these chips are an asset similar to real estate. They're revenue producing now. They're uh, you can underwrite these similar to the way that you underwrite real estate and a number of other uh, different products right now, which is a bit different than the way it's been seen historically. I think we're certainly getting more in that realm today. We've certainly been stepping in that direction, but funny to see that come out today as well, because I think that's inevitably that's the way it's going. It's just there still are some questions out there. Uh, and still a lot of CapEx being poured in here for an undefined outcome, at least at this stage.
Right. For sure. Well, and I think that this comes back to, okay, so what do we do as investment managers, advisors, or as investors. And I think that you have to remember position sizing here. There's a place for SpaceX in a portfolio, and it's starting to become something that I think, yeah, like generally speaking, like we've talked about in the past, IPOs are dangerous.
Mhm.
A lot of volatility around the IPO trade. I mean, we saw it with SpaceX. It traded at 135 to start, traded there for a minute,
Yep.
and then up to what, 20,
I
201?
think, yeah, I hit like 225.
It, okay, yeah, I must have intraday hit 225. And then now, but back down to near 100. I think it was at 108 at its low.
Hmm.
And then, now it's trading at 132, just beneath its IPO price. The first 3 to 6 months of IPOs, and oftentimes the first couple of years of IPOs can be lackluster. Facebook is a great example of, classic example. I think they lost half their market cap in the first 6 months.
Hmm.
Um, Not abnormal, but after, now we've seen trading through June, through July, into August. Um, at some point, SpaceX likely becomes part of most people's portfolios. But, and if you have a very strong conviction in SpaceX and you believe in the message, just like if you believe in anything, you should invest in it, right? But if you're just speculating, you know, remember, which a lot of people are, remember that position sizing and try to keep it reasonable relative to your portfolio, because I think it's easy to get overhyped and dump a bunch of money into something, and maybe you get lucky and maybe you don't. um, you can get lucky or you can have a bad outcome there, which is why, again, position sizing becomes so important. It'll eventually probably become part of the S&P.
Yep.
Eventually they can just flip to being profitable. They could be added to the S&P, and they'll be a large part of the S&P just because of their market cap. But it's going to be, or it's something to take into account and not get too big of a position too quickly. But maybe it's something you could start to add.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, it's been a volatile ride so far. Especially after earnings, we had a notable drop. I think the really interesting thing that I've been watching here recently was we saw that initial block of shares that was locked up from people who held the company pre-IPO.
Yeah.
We saw a big chunk of that get unlocked. Not as much as we could have seen because there was a 10% additional um, a 10% additional amount of shares that could have been released, assuming it was trading around a certain price target. But we had a substantial amount of shares released to the market. And actually, on that day when those shares were released, the stock traded up a pretty notable amount. Now, I think there's a few things going on there. One, those people who have been locked up for so long saw it hit 225, break 200, and are potentially like, maybe I'll just ride this out a little bit longer and we'll see if we can get it up there. If we were trading around 170, would that have been the case? Maybe not. But coming off of a couple of days where we were down close to 20% to where it was before, at least, those individuals decided to hold their position. An overwhelming majority of them apparently decided to hold that position. So that's been an interesting thing to watch, and has been something I've been keeping my eye on, following this stock ever since its IPO, just knowing that those lockup periods are expiring. We still have a number of other lockups that are going to be expiring over the coming months. Still a decent amount of shares to be unlocked. But this initial unlocking, we didn't see a major sell off, which was a potential concern that a lot of people had.
See who are the largest owners of SpaceX of the outstanding shares now. Obviously, Elon.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a good pre-trivia question. Do you know how much Elon owns of SpaceX?
Ooh, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. Like in percentage or just absolute dollar amount?
Just percentage.
Percentage? I'll go really aggressive and say 50%.
50%. No, it's less than that. This is of the outstanding shares. I'm going to show you this in Bloomberg. Percentage out, 11%.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. That'd be a lot. That'd be a lot tied up in SpaceX.
Yeah. Do you see the interesting? That's an interesting one though. I did not know that. The second largest holder is Alphabet Inc. Is that
Yeah, that's interesting. It,
is Alphabet Inc.
and is this just percent of free float right now, or is this like
This
capturing
is the
everything?
number of shares outstanding. So that
Okay.
might not be the best, you know, but just curious. It's always interesting to look at this.
Yeah, that's still a notable amount.
Alphabet Inc. I'm thinking of that as Alphabet. Oh, that's Google. Yeah,
Yeah.
should be. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah,
Anyways,
I mean,
interesting.
seeing the underlying stock portfolio of other publicly traded fund business companies is always funny.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, it is always interesting.
but yeah, I mean, we'll see how the rest of the lockup, the unlock periods go. But this initial one went better than I think a lot of people expected. Certainly could have gone the other way.
Certainly. It certainly could have.
Yeah.
Well, we'll probably come back and revisit SpaceX multiple times here,
Yeah.
especially as the year progresses, because what's going to be interesting to see is as SpaceX moves towards profitability, hopefully, or at least most people hope, uh, it'll start to be considered to add to the S&P 500, which will
Yeah.
be a big day. I don't think, like I said earlier, that's not up for possible, that's not really possible for some time from now. I think middle of next year would be the earliest possible date if they do hit profitable, if they are end up profitable. Um, but it'll be a big day when that does happen. Lots of trading having to occur there for those index funds tracking the S&P 500 to get the position size they'll need in SpaceX.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely going to be a notable amount. Uh, before we wrap things up on SpaceX IPOs in general, talking about the S&P and the potential inclusion of SpaceX, I wanted to share this really quick. This is an interesting chart, and I can't take full credit for this. There's a nice market deck that Y Charts comes out with, I think, every quarter, and this is something that they published in their most recent release that I found really interesting and brought it in here. And basically, it's the performance of an IPO index. And this is an ETF that tracks an IPO index, the Renaissance IPO index for those curious. And it compares the performance over time from end of 2013 to today, comparing that performance to the S&P 500 and QQQ. Um, and what you see here is just IPOs in general, when we measure them with this particular index, have underperformed by a relatively notable margin. There's some important caveats to take into account with this. The Renaissance IPO ETF does not automatically get shares in these underlying companies day one of the IPO. They have a quarterly reconstitution process where companies that are IPO during that quarter get added. Um, so it's not necessarily a perfect tracker of like, let's say we go out and buy all of the biggest IPOs day one and just hold them. But I think it's an interesting thing to follow too, because by missing out on that initial date of the IPO and buying it, 3 months after, you kind of take out some of that initial volatility that can be really harmful. And to see that it still lags by a decent amount, I think is an interesting data point to have. And just an important thing to keep in mind when dealing with IPOs in general. Um, they can be very volatile and sometimes they don't necessarily pan out. Now, again, this is a somewhat of a flawed metric, but I think it gives an interesting insight into how these IPOs perform. Because I think, from my understanding, the way they do index reconstitution, major IPOs are included after they do a quarterly review, and anything that has IPO'd during that 3 month period gets added. at that point in time. So not necessarily on the initial day. And then I think they hold it up to 3 years after the initial IPO. So potentially missing out on that very volatile initial trading day and then holding it from then on. So um, just an interesting little data point to have. YCharts highlighted that in their deck, and I found that interesting.
Yeah, it's a cool chart, and it makes sense. There's a ton of volatility associated with that introductory period, and there are obviously cases in which those IPOs turn out great, right? And cases where it really looks bad.
Yeah.
That represents that pretty well. But
Yep.
awesome. Well, that's good coverage on SpaceX. Very, very timely, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. We've had a lot going on there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I do have one SpaceX trivia question for you.
All right. I've got one SpaceX trivia question for you and then one general space trivia question for you.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, why don't you go first then, since I only have one question?
All right, we'll do the SpaceX one first.
Okay.
What does the number 9 in Falcon 9 refer to for the Falcon 9 rocket?
Is it I mean, this is maybe too simple of a guess, but is it the number of times it took them to get that rocket to launch successfully?
No, that would be funny. That would be funny. No, there's 9 first stage engines. So
Oh, okay.
that's where that came from.
Gotcha.
I
Okay.
did not know that. But they talk about the Falcon 9 all the time, and now you know.
Oh, I know. 9 first stage engines. Interesting. Okay. Awesome. All right. My one SpaceX question for you. SpaceX let's see, you remember they absorbed the AI company from Elon Musk.
Mhm.
There was a data center involved in that was
Okay.
absorbed. Do you know the name of the data center?
No, I have no idea. Um, let's see. I don't know. I'll make something up, but I'm because don't they have one of their things with AI? They call it like Dojo or something like that.
Yeah.
Dojo House or something. I don't know.
It's not Dojo House. It's called Colossus.
Okay, that's cool.
Colossus, which is kind of a cool name.
That is a cool
Um,
name.
do you happen to know what state it's in?
I have no idea. I mean, knowing Elon, Texas maybe, but it's also like Colossus of Rhodes, maybe Rhode Island. I'm gonna go with Texas.
It's actually in Memphis, Tennessee. There's two campuses
Okay.
down there, actually. Colossus One, which is a 300 megawatt facility, which has inside of it 220,000 NVIDIA GPUs. And then they have Colossus Two, which is a separate campus also in Memphis. That one's being built, I think.
Okay.
It might actually be built already, but I think all of Colossus One is leased to Anthropic. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
the whole thing is, and I think it's like a billion. It's over $1 billion a month that Anthropic is paying to SpaceX for the leasing of Colossus One.
Oh, yeah,
It's
I
like
did not
I
know
think
there
it's
was that.
I think it's a $15 billion a year contract.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's pretty cool. I really like that name. That's fun.
Yeah, it's a cool name, Colossus.
That is fun.
Hmm.
All right, we're gonna get we're gonna get really, I don't know, out there right now with this next question.
Sounds good.
Just generic space trivia here. How long does it take sunlight to reach the Earth?
I have heard this answer before, but it didn't matter to me at the moment. It was just like, oh, that's kind of cool, and then I forgot it.
Yeah.
And it's been
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say 12 minutes.
Well,
It's
it's not a bad guess.
93. 93 million miles.
Yep. 93 million miles. Yeah, it's not exactly 12 minutes. It's closer to 8 minutes. But
Okay.
that's a pretty good guess. I would have guessed quicker than 8 minutes
Yeah.
if somebody just asked me.
It's a long way. I knew that. It's 93 million miles. For some reason, that sticks in my mind from like sixth grade. I never forgot that. But
Yeah, it's a good little ways away.
I don't know the speed of light transferred into, minutes per mile.
Yeah, let's see here. I have it down. It's 186,282 miles per second.
Yeah. Okay. Didn't know that.
Yep. Another random little trivia tidbit to have.
Yeah, I like it. Interesting. Lots of trivia today. Got some bonus trivia in there.
Yep. Yep. There you go.
Awesome. Well, that wraps it up for me. You got anything else, Nick?
Nope, nothing else here.
Sounds good. Thanks for listening, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.